Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Rukhsana Rahman from the Department of Women's Studies, Guwahati University. I will be speaking on military sociology and gender. Here, we are going to examine how the theories, particularly the feminist theories, are related to the other theories in the international context, and also to understand the gendered nature of conflict zones. While introducing the concept of what is military sociology, it has been found that as sociology evolved as a discipline in the 19th century, it is strongly influenced by the ideological and humanistic concerns. Military organization and war as a social process were given little attention. However, the institutional presence of the military was acknowledged by Herbert Spencer in the year 1908, an early social Darwinist who saw social organization evolving from primitive military forms to advanced industrial societies. In contrast, Karl Marx and his followers saw military forces as necessary for the imperialism that capitalist industrial societies would have to pursue as they exhausted domestic raw materials and markets. Weber, in the year 1968, in his economic sociology, acknowledged the role of the military as the agent of the state for the legitimate monopolization of organized violence, and drew heavily on the Prussian army as the prototype for his general model of bureaucratic organization. And Emily Durkheim, in the year 1951, viewed participation in the military as one of the social conditions affecting the rate of suicide in his study of social integration. Today, major industrial societies are also military powers, and neo-Marxist scholars point the role of the military in international capitalist expansion. In many nations, such as Switzerland and Israel, the military plays a major integrative role in society. In modern nations, where the military frequently plays a less central role, it is likely to affect the lives of a large proportion of the population through its impact on economic, political, familial, and educational institutions. Thus, military sociology is a systematic study of the military as a social group. It relates to and examines issues of service personnel as a distinct group with coerced collective action. Such collective action is based on shared interest linked to survival in vocation and combat. Military sociology also concerns civil-military relations between other groups or government. This field of study sprawls from war to peace and from disasters to festivals. Military sociology emerged in the beginning of the World War II, and the issues studied during that period of time more or less tend to be central even today. With interdisciplinary collaboration, this field emerged as an applied one, a field oriented towards organizational and small group processes rather than towards national and transnational concerns. In the mid-20th century, to describe the structural relationships between military forces and their host societies in the modern world, C. Wade Mills in the year 1956 came up with the power elite, and Harold D. Laswell in the year 1941 developmental model of the garrison state, which enhanced the stature of military sociology at the academic level. Subsequently, there was Samuel P. Huntington and Maurice Janowitz, who published books on the nature of military profession and relationship of military to the state. Now let us discuss about gender and military sociology. Gender as a component, how it is related to the very concept of the military sociology we are going to examine now. Gender refers to the social expectations regarding behavior which are seen as appropriate for the members of each sex. Gender does not refer to the physical attributes which differentiate male and female, but to socially formed traits of masculinity and femininity according to Giddens. It is in the year 2006, 1017 page. Since gender and gender roles are shaped by social factors, they are related to power and status in societies around the world. People are socialized into gender roles as male, female, or transgender by society's social institutions such as the family, school, the media, and even the military. These are taught so that different responses and what is considered appropriate behavior can be appropriately reproduced. For example, D'Amico and Weinstein in the year 1999, page 4, believed that the military, I quote, is a fundamental site for the construction of gender. That is, the defining of the boundaries of behavior, indeed, of life possibilities for people we can call men and women, unquote. The military has been the quintessential masculine institution where boys become men, the few opportunities for women and no opportunities for transgender. Question of gender also emerge in context of institutional activities, peacekeeping operations, and counter-insurgency operations. The question of the integration of women comes up when militaries have to ensure that they are responsive to the changing society, which they defend, that pays for them and without whose support they can do little. Militaries have been forced into adopting certain values and beliefs which reflect those of the wider society. For example, the integration of women, ethnic minorities, and in the majority of NATO militaries, acceptance of homosexuality. Hicks Stim in the year 1996, the pages 68 to 69 tells us that there are two quite different circumstances which increase the number of women in a military force. One is wartime. The other is in liberal democracies where the military is all volunteer and where there is an emphasis on providing equal opportunity to all citizens. In the latter circumstance, acceptance of women is seen to be congruent with occupational values. Now let us discuss about the gender dimension of military. Liberal feminists argue for equality under law, that there should be equal standards and opportunities for both men and women. That only when physical fitness tests are gender neutral and all military occupations are open to women, can women fit into the so-called legitimate role, quote unquote, of a military personnel. The logic behind this is that men and women have the capacity to perform equally. The Canadians have found that in battles, women can be just as tough as men, and the public accepts it easily when women soldiers die in Afghanistan. But what is evident as the only real barrier in women's participation in combat has been male attitude towards women in combat. The attitude of some military units encourages their male members to cultivate a certain body image and set up mannerisms. Like the depiction of a military image being man-like the muscular, where women are seen as weak bodies wielding relatively less power. The idea of femininity itself attracts sarcasm, and the sole emphasis is upon cultivating maleness that is in binary opposition to femaleness. Chauvinist ethics that emerged in the Victorian era of women being delicate objects who are to be protected is openly advocated in the military. Thus, gender identities in military emerge in relation to perceived sex difference, which in turn shape those differences. Now let us discuss about the logic behind keeping women out of the military. Women were and are kept out of the armed forces because of the myth of biology, which is not seen as the social construction that it is. In this argument, women are supposed to be genetically programmed to nurture life and are physically and emotionally not strong enough for combat. Those who subscribe to this line of thought argue that this division of labor is biologically based. Nevertheless, women have made their presence felt in the military. The media coverage during the Persian Gulf War highlighted the pioneering role of women in the military. And after that, women have continued to be represented as camp followers, nurses, revolutionaries, spies, soldiers in disguise, or as regular female soldiers, though rarely as supreme commanders. The obvious problems emerged out of existing gender stereotypes. If they acted like one of the guys, they are suspect, but acting as themselves also made others suspect them. A pioneer in gender military studies has been Medi, Wexler, Segal. She in 1995 is credited with developing the first model of the women-military relationship. In this model, she looks at three sets of variables affecting the relationship. First, military variables, which include the national security situation, the level of military technology, the structure of the forces and policies affecting entry. Secondly, social structure variables, which include a country's demographic patterns, labor force characteristics, that is women's participation and gendered niches, the state of the civilian economy and the structure of the family. Thirdly, cultural variables such as notions of male and female, values, public discourse about gender equality. The traditional cohesion of the military community is thought to be founded on homogeneity, called by some as cult of homogeneity, quote unquote. But there is no evidence to support this myth. Cohesion is based on commonality of experience, shared risk, and mutual experiences of hardship, and not on gender distinctions. This challenges the traditional male military culture, which concerns the issue of social representation and diversity. While the wider employment of women is still an ongoing process, focus has shifted to equal opportunities for all. It is important that the military be integral to the society it serves, not isolated from it. Therefore, the composition of the military must reflect the population it serves. However, what is evident in this integration process is that military chauvinism has not been lost. Now let us discuss about institutional stereotypes. Febraro in the year 2007, the page number 111, reports that males resist women in leadership roles by commenting on their feminine quote unquote qualities or appearance. Both Davis and Febraro describe how women's ability to perform in leadership roles in the combat arms is constantly questioned and compromised. Women may simply not be perceived of as competent leaders by virtue of their gender. In the military, the attributes of a successful leader, like decisiveness, confidence, and assertiveness, are perceived as missing in women. Israeli military historian Martin van Creveld maintains that the feminization of the military is equivalent to its weakening and decline, leaving the armed forces in the awkward position of being successively incapable of doing what they have been invented for. He writes that, I quote, "Because research shows that going into combat is the last thing most military women want," unquote. Creveld in the year 2001, page number 442. It is said that women in the armed forces would lead to, I quote, "higher rates of attrition, greater need for medical care, higher rates of non-availability, lower rates of deployability, lesser physical ability, aggravated problems of single parenthood, dual service marriages, fraternization, sexual harassment, sexual promiscuity, and homosexuality, all of which adversely affect unit cohesion, morale, and the fighting spirit of the armed forces." Women are portrayed as needing male courtesy and protection and as housewives who should receive flowers when entertaining officers in their homes. The image of a prim and proper officer's wife reinforces male attitudes towards women in combat. Kummel remarks that these constructs of the female as someone to be courted and to be protected symbolically makes war a man's business. This is reflected in interviews with German servicemen who feel that it would be difficult for them to see a woman body dead or suffering, and the idea of a woman inflicting violence is strange, quote unquote. But none of these men would find it strange if the woman was protecting her child. The line is somehow crossed in protecting the state. These people believe that the military would lose its institutional soul, quote unquote, rooted in war fighting. Others are of the view that combat effectiveness will diminish with the presence of women. Another perspective to looking at it will be male colleagues who feel they are being passed over in favor of women. In UN circles, the words gender Gestapo, quote unquote, can be heard. Conaway in the year 2006 in page number 10 tells us that when positions are held, quote unquote, for women, men become infuriated. The danger of reserved posts for women as well as ethnic minorities is that they can appear as token and face additional layers of scrutiny that the dominant group does not face. Nowadays, the vocabulary of gender mainstreaming has become omnipresent in the international arena. However, it is important to remember that gender is not just about women and girls. One of the problems with the concept of gender is that, like ethnicity, is too frequently identified with biology. This misses out on the social construction of identity. Now, let us focus the discussion on efforts at gender mainstreaming and its importance. To understand one of the trends of postmodernism, the example of women in military can be helpful. Pressures have grown to include women in all assignments, including combat. The Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action in the year 1995 established the importance of gender as a primary strategy for the promotion of equality around the world and has a special section devoted to women and armed conflict. Both the declaration and platform called for the mainstreaming of a gender perspective in all policies and programs of United Nations member states. The Z report talks about the masculine culture of UN peace operations and recommends more gender balancing in its missions. The Z report talks about the masculine culture of United Nations peace operations and recommends more gender balancing in its missions. According to the report, the presence of more women in a mission, especially at senior levels, helps to promote an environment that discourages sexual exploitation and abuse, particularly of the local population. Miller and Moskos in the year 1995 found that American peacekeepers in mixed gender and mixed race units in Somalia adopted a more humanitarian approach to the local population than homogeneous male units. Similarly, a study for the United Nations Division for the Advancement of Women found that the incidence of rape and prostitution falls significantly with just a token female presence. I quote, "Stated simply, men behave better when in the presence of women from their own culture," unquote, remarked D. Groot. The UN Security Council Resolution number SCR 1325 for the first time formally recognized the distinct role and experiences of women in context of armed conflict, peace building, peacekeeping and conflict resolution. Again, UNIFEM focuses on including women in the peace process. One of the 4 priorities of UNIFEM's multi-year funding framework for 2004 to 2007 was achieving gender equality in democratic governance in peacetime and in recovery from war. As a result, many of the agency's programs aimed at increasing the numbers of women in post-conflict decision-making, building women's political influence, and making governance processes more sensitive to gender/women's issues. In spite of the efforts, it is evident that even in the international arena, women have to settle for softer roles. When it comes to real combat, the absence of women is obvious. One of the problems is the underrepresentation of women in military forces that contribute to UN operations. For example, as of March in the year 2008, women comprise less than 2% of all military personnel in United Nations peace operations. Apart from representation also, it is the proactive role that the already enrolled military women have to play. Until women can make a positive contribution to peacekeeping operations, their presence will have limited impact. There has been little increase in the number of women participating in UN peace missions since the passing of SCR 1325, and female heads of missions is rare. This is because the most important troop contributing nations such as Pakistan, India and Bangladesh are opens where women rarely participate in the security sector. It is important to note that even in developed countries such as Canada, legislation was required to address institutional and cultural barriers and open up the armed forces to women. Only 1% of military personnel are female and 4% are in police forces. Although 30% of international civilian staff is female, only 10% are in management positions in peace operations. Women also make up 22% of nationally recruited staff, but again they are relegated to clerical and service jobs only. In the report for Refugees International, it has been noted that masculine culture, quote-unquote, of international militaries and police in peace operations contributes to several attitudes such as the code of silence concerning sexual misconduct, the view that boys will be boys, quote-unquote, and the fear of recrimination for being a whistleblower, which make it difficult to introduce gender-sensitive policies. Therefore, after the discussion, it can be concluded that whether as actors or as recipients, women have not been allowed to sink well in the military. Traditionally, a male bastion has continued with its values. Though the scanty presence of women in military cannot be denied, yet maleness is what is aspired for. that strength is a male domain is reinforced by composition of combat operations and also names of missiles or drones which are often visible in national and international domain. But as the military is opening its doors to interdisciplinary perspective that marks a change in warfare strategies in order to lessen casualties and avoid conflict, inclusion of women is indispensable. To gather cultural intelligence, provide regional knowledge and orientation to military commanders and troops in order to mitigate conflict and minimize misunderstandings that can lead to ill will, unwarranted violence or inadvertent casualties, a cultural turn will be must. And that cultural turn has to be in the form of military becoming an egalitarian institutions for all genders. Thank you.